a man on fire.
Go away! Read some books!
Hold me tight. Don't let me run into the wicked night. I'll be gone by the morning light, searching for something to keep me right. Well, I'm a man on fire. Watch me burn so this heart don't desire.
Hello, humans. Welcome back to the Slackline Quote of the Day broadcast. You are here with the boss.
The boss is coming.
That's a made-up dumb fairy tale name, you
We are chatting quotes from around the web and around the globe. Whatever I stumble upon, trying to keep them contemporary. But I'm sick of talking about Donald Trump and all the bullshit he's got going on. So we're dipping into the past today. Coming at you Monday, February 12th, 2018, from Vancouver, Canada. It is Monday. It is Family Day, holiday up here. But we are coming at you anyways, and we have a new producer in the booth. We decided that Greg was not working out, and he is getting replaced by my good friend Jerry. Jerry Jimenez, the producer in the back room. He's bringing us our sponsors. And Jerry, who do we got today out there bringing us the sponsor today? Kindle Direct Download. Want to say you've read all the classics without the time investment? Make sure you get Kindle Direct Download. That will download the books directly into your brain. No time investment at all. Minutes, and you can have all of the classics: Shakespeare, Orwell, Dickens, Hemingway, anything you want. It can be directly downloaded right into your skull, and you can cite any passage from any page. That again is Kindle Direct Download, and they are bringing us our quote today from one Henry David Thoreau, U.S. 19th century author. How many a person has dated a new era in their life from the reading of a book? That is Henry David Thoreau. Again, it's actually how many man has dated and from his life, but we switched it to people. And so that quote today reminded me to go back through my my own history with books and reading, and think about how the stages of things that I've read had marked different points in my life, and I found it really interesting. Myself, I kind of agree with Mr. Thoreau that I do mark a new era in my life with the reading of books. So we'll take, if you'll indulge me, slackliners out there, which probably just includes Emily and Jerry in the booth there. We will go back through my history of reading. I don't think I read very much, to be honest. When I think about how much somebody should be reading, really, I'd probably read more than the average person, books-wise. I mean, I kind of argue that we all read way more than we even used to, because we're always texting, we're always reading stuff on our phones. The content of it might not be great all the time, but we do read, we do intake, and even we adapt the language for better or worse. But as far as myself is concerned, I wouldn't count myself as a huge reader, although I have been getting a lot back into it lately, and I really have been enjoying it. But if you ask my mom, I remember my mom saying a while ago that I read a lot as a kid, and I kind of thought about it. I didn't really think I did, but thinking about it, even as a young kid, I read a lot of like kids books. I loved Franklin the Turtle. I loved the Bernstein Bears. I read a lot of mythology. I really liked Norse mythology, and we also had these kind of classics for kids. People probably remember them. I can't remember the actual like name of the brand, but they had the classics, Three Musketeers and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and stuff like that. But I think they were all kitted up. I'd like to go back and read those books because I did read those, but they were pretty short, and I don't think that they were the actual stories. Frankenstein was one of them too, actually. So yeah, I did a lot of reading of that type of thing when I was younger, and maybe that puts me into the category of reading more than most. But where I really did most of my reading, and where my mom cited most of my reading, was from comics, actually. Not even from like superhero comics, but things like Garfield. I always ordered new Garfield from the book orders at school, and Archie comics. I loved Archie comics. I had a stack of them in my bathroom all the time. And whenever we went grocery shopping, I'd grab a new Archie comic if there was a new one. So I read those types of things quite a bit. But as far as getting into like actual books, long books, and retaining their stories, I remember probably a pretty good lull in my mid-teens, like toddler to mid-teens, I guess, where I kind of only read Garfield comics and Archie comics, and everything else was cartoons and TV and that type of thing. Like we had to read books for school. But I remember really not being interested in really getting through them all that much. We read Lord of the Flies, but I know Lord of the Flies, but I don't really remember all that much from it. We read a few Shakespeare plays, which I've actually been meaning to go back and read on Jerry's suggestion. I was always pretty decent with the Shakespeare plays in school and stuff. But I mean, that was all homework, so it's not really the same. I remember trying to read Lord of the Rings as probably a 13-year-old, but like, to be frank, like, fuck, it was so hard to get through. It was so much writing, so many like long stretches of walking and singing and stuff like that. I had friends that loved it, but I think I got through to the end of the Two Towers. But then I couldn't really continue. It was tough to get through. And I'd say that I didn't really start completing books until I picked up Harry Potter. And even then, it took me a while to pick those up. I remember my parents all got us each, me and my two brothers, one of the 3 Harry Potter books that were out at the time. My older brother got the Philosopher's Stone, my younger brother got the Chamber of Secrets, and I got the Prisoner of Azkaban. And so we kind of read them. I mean, I did. I read the Prisoner of Azkaban first because it was the one that I got. So everything was pretty out of context, and I don't really remember reading it that first time. And that's probably when I was like 13 maybe. And I remember the movies started to come out. And they were pretty good and got me kind of back interested. And I remember my friend, shout out to Stu Ferry, and his mom, actually, Ruth, who's a boss as well, suggesting getting back into Harry Potter. I remember quite a few of the books were out at this point. I think they were on to the Order of the Phoenix. And there was like a huge deal about it, I remember. It was like, oh, main character dies, and people were lined up around the block, and Harry Potter was like a big thing, but I think that's when I remember really realizing, like, holy shit, this is like a phenomenon. And so I went back and started reading them. And by this point, I think the first 2 movies had come out. The Prisoner of Azkaban hadn't yet. It was the Philosopher's Stone and the Chamber of Secrets, And then The Prisoner of Azkaban was just coming out, I think. And I hadn't read the first 2 books. And thinking about it now, I don't think I actually ever have. Because I started with The Prisoner of Azkaban. Because I had just seen the first 2 movies and figured that was enough. And then I went along with from there and finished the whole series in relatively short order, and obviously fell in love with it, and I love Harry Potter now. And that's probably the first time I really got super engaged in like a world of a book and a story or a series of stories. And honestly, it was probably the last time since until recently that I was really, really into reading books cover to cover. In the way of like, man, like instead of going online at night or watching TV at night, I'm going to go into my room, I'm going to read my book until I fall asleep type style. Like Harry Potter was really my introduction into that type of engagement with a book. And then I went off to university, and I guess maybe kind of the same sort of thing happened. You know, you're in school, and reading is now a chore again. You know, I have a lot of books left over from English courses and stuff that I went through school that I've never actually read. They were on the reading list. I had to buy them, and I've held on to them because I've meant to read them, actually. I've been meaning to, especially lately, because most of them are classics. But what I was really into at that time was graphic novels, things like Watchmen, things like The Dark Knight Returns, Batman Year One. I really, really got into the idea of a graphic novel and superheroes in general. Actually, my latter parts of high school and early parts of university is when I really started to get into comics. And I never really collected comics or read the serialized comics from like Spider-Man or anything like that. Again, I started to get into the graphic novels, and that's what made me realize, like, man, these things can have real depth and real interesting stories, and I started to dig into the history of comics and stuff, and I actually took a course in university. I remember I discovered that if I had to take any English courses, the best way to do it was to go to the library and see what books were on the reading list for each course. And if I had read some of them already, or if they maybe piqued my interest enough, I would make sure to take those try to take those courses versus getting stuck with a bunch of books that I didn't want to read. And I ended up finding this fantasy course that was actually all graphic novels. We did read Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns, but we also read some different ones that I'd never had before. One's called Bone. One was called what was it? Fable. And those were really interesting. There's a whole different world of graphic novels that I never really knew about. And even now I'm not really that into. I need to get deeper into it. I'd like to collect a few more, but most of my graphic novel interest is in Batman. I think he's the most interesting character of all the comic book characters in general. But it's interesting because the history of comics and interest in comics actually parlayed into back into reading real books. I don't want to say real books, into novels and stuff like that. When I lived near Chapters, and I did like going to Chapters and picking out books and maybe getting a new a new music biography or something like that. I have a few of those. Or comedy book. That's just kind of some silly stuff. What do I got here? I got one that says it's called Be Amazing, and it's just a bunch of silly little basically bathroom reading or whatever. But then one day I went there and I picked up a book by Michael Chabon, who is an American author, and the book that I saw was The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay. And I picked it up and I thought, that looks interesting, and I looked at the front and it's kind of superhero-ish with some sort of comic-type panels, and I read a top winner of the Pulitzer Prize, and I'm like, oh, interesting. It's a pretty thick book, but I kind of read the back of it. I found the cover interesting. It's about a teenager who escapes. It's about a Jewish teenager who escapes Europe at the outbreak of World War II, and moves to New York to live with his cousin, and they start a comic book company alongside Marvel and DC, and they kind of get all immersed in that world in a serious way, and it's a beautiful story about family. He's trying to get his brother over from Europe. It's about love. He meets a beautiful woman, and it's about civil rights, as a lot of these people were under the watch of government for being communist sympathizers and homosexuals, and for putting those types of ideals into the artwork, and through all the censorship issues and stuff that they went through. It's a really, really amazing story, and it sucked me right in, and it got me right back into reading. It's like I forgot that books could be like this, and since then, I've ripped off most of Michael Crichton's stuff. I got into Orwell recently, which I really, really loved. 1984, and Animal Farm I'd never read until this year, and man, I regret not reading them earlier. I read Ready Player One earlier this year. And so over the last probably 3 or 4 years, I've really gotten back into reading, trying to read at least a book a year maybe, which I don't really count as that much, because I know some people who read, a few books a year at least, but trying to get back into it, and yeah, I have all these books laid over from university that I never ended up finishing. Never Let Me Go is one, which is actually a movie now. It's a sci-fi futuristic novel. The Time Machine, a classic. Frankenstein, classic. Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass I have. The Light Princess is supposed to be a classic. It's tiny. I don't know why I haven't read it yet. H.P. Lovecraft, who I have a bunch of his stuff that I haven't really gone through, and I've been meaning to. So, yeah, that's my timeline with books. Maybe that's where we'll cut it off for today. You have been listening to The Slackline. That quote again is from Henry David Thoreau. How many person has dated a new era in their life from the reading of a book? That again, Henry David Thoreau, brought to us by Kindle Direct Download. Want to say you've read all the classics without the time investment? Try Kindle Direct Download right into your brain. We'd like to thank Crooked Spies again for providing the music. Make sure you're following the Slackline on Instagram at the.slack.line, on Twitter at slackline_radio, and on YouTube and iTunes at the Slackline Podcast. You have been listening to The Boss.
The boss is coming!
That's a made-up dumb fairy tale name, you.
Thanks to anybody paying attention, and we will talk tomorrow. Have a good one. Bye for now.
It's over my head.